We're looking at lessons that Jesus provides through Luke's report of Christ's life. And today, the specific is we're going to be doing some fine-tuning. Fine-tuning in the area of our faith. And I want us to be able to understand the what and the why of what true belief really is. And as we look at that, I just say we need to understand the what and why of true belief, learning whom to trust. Learning when to trust, learning when not to trust. And learning why to trust God. And why that should be the object. That should be the focus of our faith. And in order to get that started, and in honor of today being the start of the NFL season, we thought we'd take a quick peek here. And this cartoon's about trusting. It really is, because here you've got Charlie saying to Lucy, well, you think I'm some sort of a stupid fool? What kind of fool do you take me for? I'm not trying to make you a fool out of you, Charlie. I mean, of course not. Well, oh, yeah, he says. Well, the whole trouble with you is you don't trust anyone, Lucy says. And, you get burned one time, you get burned two times, and most of the time we step back and say, well, I'm not going to let that happen again. The whole issue of broken trust is a hard thing, and so she's addressing that with Charlie. And she basically, he says, look, every year you pull the same trick on me. He says, you say you're going to hold the ball while I kick it, and you never do. So he expresses, even with a little more anger, a little more enthusiasm and emotion, he says, you always pull it away, and I land flat on my back. Every year you pull the same trick. You Packer fans, I'm sorry, I didn't say that. And every single year, and she says, listen, Charlie Brown, if you're going to get along in this world, you have to learn to be trusting. And anyone can trust someone who's trustworthy. She says, I'm giving you a chance to learn to trust someone who's not trustworthy. Isn't that a good one? You're right. I've got to learn to be more trusting. You hold the ball and I'll kick it. Boom. She did it again. So there he is, and she looks down and says, well, see you here again next year. Whole issue of trusting. You've been burned? Do you feel like God has burned you? And if we're honest, every one of us has moments when you say, why, God? Why did that happen? What's going on here? My faith is struggling. And I want us to realize this morning, as we express the theme of this passage, the theme of this study, that my faith, individually, each one of us, my faith is the foundation of my relationship with God. As my faith goes, so goes my relationship with God. They go together. And we're looking at Luke chapter 7 this morning, but I want to raise the thought here from Hebrews 11. And we're going to look at this a couple more times through the message today, where we see where the apostle, whoever it was, we don't know for sure who wrote Hebrews, and that doesn't matter. It's God's word, and it says, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. For by it, men of old, men throughout history, have gained approval. He goes on in verse 6 and he says, and without faith, without that agency of faith, trusting God, it is impossible to please Him. For he who comes to God must believe that He exists and that He is the one and the only who rewards those who seek Him. And we're going to consider how that plays into our lives today. And as we continue just considering, expressing the whole concept of the theme that my faith is the foundation of my relationship with the Lord, some questions. Each one of us can ask ourselves, what am I doing, first of all, to stabilize my faith? What am I doing to make sure that my faith is stable, that it's on a firm foundation? What am I doing to strengthen my faith? What am I doing to stretch my faith so it grows? How often do I recognize the impact of my faith? The impact of my faith on my life and the impact of my faith on the lives of others. A brief illustration, I'll be using several different things like this today, but just comment that I look back at my life and I see certain people of faith that have been part of my past. And I see how the faith that they had in the Lord, how it encouraged me, how it strengthened me, how it helped me to recognize the value of truly trusting. So, the impact of my faith, how often do I recognize that? Others are watching. God is watching. And how often do I recognize the importance of my faith? It is the foundation of my relationship with the Lord. Am I aware of the object of my faith? What am I trusting? Who am I trusting? What is the central piece of my trust in God? Am I trusting in bad theology or am I trusting in correct theology? Do I understand who God is and what He's promised to do? If you know me well and if you follow me at all, you'll recognize, and I don't say something often because I have to be careful how I come across this way, but it just blows my mind how often people want to take and rip the Scriptures right out of their context and make it say things that it doesn't say. Claim promises that were given to other people that really, I'm encouraged by what happened with them, but I can't claim that promise. And I have to look somewhere else and say, okay, what does God's Word actually say to me? So, am I aware of the object of my faith, and also am I aware of the obstacles to my faith? I mean, I was shocked this morning. Someone was telling me about their history and as I say this, I don't want to overdo the whole issue of sports. But I found it interesting that plays perfectly into the message this morning. You know, I get the impression up here that y'all have had it so simple being Packer fans. Because you expect every year they're going to win, they're going to win, they're going to win. Well, somebody told me, I was a Packer fan during thick and thin. When was it ever thin? See, down in the Midwest, in fact, there were years when actually the Bears did finish ahead of the Packers in the standings. There were years when the Vikings made it to the Super Bowl. They never won it, but they made it to the Super Bowl. But the reality is as you think about that, the obstacles to our faith, it's so oftentimes the experiences we have or the things we've seen, the things that have happened around us. When we look at the elections this year, is there an obstacle to my faith there? Well, no, I believe that the election this year is going the directions that it's going in order to increase my faith. And put the object of my faith in the right spot in God Almighty and not in any political candidate. So that's the theme. Now, as we begin exposing the text this morning, observing Luke 7, 1 through 17, we're going to walk through this passage and we're going to walk rather quickly through it right now. And we're going to see what happens here, and then after we're done analyzing and exposing the text here, we're going to begin looking at the truth and how it affects our lives. But as we see this passage, what do we find? We find there in chapter 7, verse 1, Jesus completed the sermon that he had preached there in chapter 6. He completed this teaching series, so to speak, that he'd had. And he went to Capernaum. Now, I find it interesting he went to Capernaum. Jesus was from Nazareth. Nazareth was about a day's journey from Capernaum. He'd been rejected in Nazareth, and he'd walked away from there, and he continued teaching in the Galilean regions up in the northern areas of Israel. And he went to Capernaum here, and here's some interesting and important details about Capernaum. First of all, this is the place where Jesus apparently set up his Galilean headquarters. He made a home. Nazareth was his home of origin, but he made his home in Galilee up in Capernaum. Because it seems like, especially in Luke, every time Jesus took a break from his teaching ministries, he traveled back to Capernaum. And why is that important? Well, first off, Capernaum was a rough and tumble, kind of a rough around the edges fishing community. It was on the northern coast of the Sea of Galilee. And it was probably a very typical fishing community. Because we're going to see here in a moment some different things. First of all, Peter, Andrew, James, or John and James, they were from there. They lived there. It's not clear that James and John actually grew up in Capernaum, but once they started their fishing business, they landed there. And that's where they lived. So 4 of Jesus' disciples were from Capernaum. But now what's interesting, if we would look a little farther in the book of Luke, we find in chapter 10, verse 15, that Jesus condemned this place that he made his headquarters. He condemned this place for what he saw there as a lack of faithfulness. And he said that they were worthy of God's judgment. In fact, the quote right here, "And you, Capernaum, will not be exalted to heaven, will you? You will be brought down to Hades." So here's Jesus in a rough and tumble fishing community, rough around the edges. It's his headquarters. It's where he went back on a regular basis. And yet, it wasn't the most faithful place. He didn't choose a place for his headquarters where life was going to be easy. So he went to Capernaum. Now, secondly, we see, beginning with verse 2, that there was this humble request that came to Jesus from a Roman centurion. Now, get the picture here. This is a Roman centurion, an enemy to the Jews. This centurion was a Gentile. He was not Jewish. And his servant, who was likely a Jewish lad, a slave. Servant is the kind word. Slave is the actual word in the Greek language, doulos. And the servant was sick to the point of death. So we walk through the story. We see the centurion's slave was, as it says in chapter 7, verse 2 and following, it says the slave was highly regarded by the centurion. He thought a lot of this young man. Maybe this young man himself had faith in Jesus. Maybe this young man was different than the rest of the crowd in Capernaum. But he was highly regarded. He was cared for. He was loved by the centurion. And secondly, he was sick and about to die. It was clear that he wasn't going to live long. And the centurion himself heard about Jesus. We're going to analyze that a little bit later in the message. But he heard about Jesus. The implication from the text is that he had never once seen or talked to Jesus. Now, I'll tell you, in Matthew, there's a parallel section of this. Matthew describes it differently than Luke does. But what Matthew does is Matthew, I think, leaves out details and just summarizes the story. But Luke tells us that this centurion had heard about Jesus. He'd heard about the reports that had been given of all the things he'd done, of his teaching, of his healing. And he sent then some Jewish elders. Another unique situation here. He sent some Jewish elders to ask Jesus if he would come and save the young man's life. So we have this going on. Gentile ruler, Jewish slave, Jewish elders who possibly believed in Jesus. It doesn't say. But they are asked to make the request, "Hey, Jesus, would you come and heal my sick slave?" Now, coming to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly, and get what they say. See, here's what they're saying to Jesus. This centurion, he deserves your help. He's worthy of your help. He should receive what he's asking. That itself isn't a humble request. That's the Jewish elders speaking for the centurion, saying, you know what? This guy deserves this. Why? Because he loves the Jewish people, and he even helped in the building of their synagogue. He probably contributed from his earnings for the building of the synagogue in Capernaum. That's what the text expresses, and then it says that Jesus went with these men toward the centurion's house. So he's going to at least, it appears as if he's going to grant the man's request. So the next thing we see, though, is that Jesus was intercepted by another group. This time by a group of friends of the centurion. It could have been other centurions. It could have been other Gentiles. We don't know who it was. It's just some friends of the centurion sent by him to give Jesus a second message. And that second message was, hey, Lord, don't trouble yourself. Don't come. You know, it's possible in my mind, and this is my sanctified imagination, it's possible that the Jewish elders went back to the centurion and said, hey, we took care of it. He's coming. We told him that you were so worthy of this. We told him that you deserved this help. We gave him a case that says, hey, he's got to come. The centurion, oh no. Because look at what he says next. Don't trouble yourself anymore. He says, I'm not worthy. I'm not the least bit worthy of you coming under my roof. In all likelihood, this man lived in a large, beautiful home. And there was probably nothing in the home that would have been disgraceful for Jesus to see except for the fact that it was a Gentile's home. But he says, I'm not worthy. You're too good to come under my roof. He says, I don't even feel worthy to come to you myself. I don't feel as if I have a right to come and talk to you. In a certain sense, my sanctified imagination says that this centurion is saying to Jesus, what those other guys said to you, that's not the message I want to portray. Because he felt as if, hey, I'm not even worthy to come to you myself. I don't have the right. I don't deserve anything from you because I'm a Gentile Roman centurion who's empowering over the Jewish people. So I don't have that right. I don't feel worthy. He's, you know what? I believe that if you simply say so, if you speak the word, you express it, you say it, you created the world, just think, if you just simply say it, my servant will be healed. He says, I understand how authority works because I have authority and I tell my servants to do this, I tell the elders to do this, I tell these folks to do things. They don't always do it exactly the way I want, but I understand how authority works. He says, you have extreme authority, Jesus. And your authority is so great and so majestic that all you have to do is say it. And it'll happen. Next thing we see then is Jesus expressed admiration. He expressed a sense of amazement and astonishment at this man's faith by saying to the crowd. He spoke out to the crowd. He says, not even in Israel, in all of Israel as I look, I have never found such great faith as this. That was a commendation for the Gentile centurion. That was a condemnation upon the nation of Israel. And Jesus says, I've never seen faith as great as this. I've never found it. And the text tells us, and this is the end of this story, The text tells us that when those sent to Jesus returned to the centurion's house, they found the slave to be healthy. An amazing miracle of faith. But as we look at the text, we find that Luke adds another, immediately following this, he adds another story which is only found in Luke. This next story is only found here in Luke, and I found it interesting to see how the different commentators, how the different scholars, which I don't put myself in their category, so I need to step back from that a little bit, but how they did somersaults and gymnastics in order to figure out what's this section for. Because the next thing we find here is a compassionate response by Jesus to a grieving mother. And this widowed mother had lost her only son. She was a widow. She'd lost her only son. And let's walk through the story and we'll see how it ties to the rest. At least how I believe it ties to the rest as we draw the applications. Because Jesus left Capernaum and went a day's journey away to Nain. And this is closer to Nazareth. So he left Capernaum, he went a day's journey away to Nain. Apparently he was probably going to do some teaching. We don't know exactly what his purpose was, but he goes a day's journey, and he's accompanied by his disciples and also a large crowd. He had a following. He had people who went with him. So he goes there, and approaching the city gate, they're getting ready to go into this city. They met a funeral procession. And there was a dead man being carried out in a coffin. He was the only son of his mother who was there, grieving, and she was a widow. And we note there was a sizable crowd from the city that was with her. They were apparently carrying out the Jewish rite of a funeral. And they're carrying this young man out on the coffin, and Jesus meets them. And when Jesus saw her, it says he felt extreme compassion. He felt a sense of, oh! And he said to her, and you stop and realize, how many times when you see somebody crying and you try to stop them crying, why do you try to stop people from crying? Because it's awkward. It's hard to talk to somebody that's crying. It's hard to relate to somebody that's crying. You can cry with them, but Jesus says to the lady, he says, please try to stop crying. Please try to stop weeping. Stop. And then Jesus did what no good Jew would ever do, because he didn't touch the dead. He stepped forward and he touched the coffin. The pallbearers stopped walking. It says they stopped in their tracks, probably because they're thinking, what do we do now? Because that wasn't supposed to happen. And then Jesus said, young man, I'm telling you, arise. And there are 3 times, let me just say as before I go on, there are 3 times in the Gospels where Jesus raised someone from the dead. He raised this young man from the dead. He raised Jairus' daughter from the dead. And he raised Lazarus from the dead. And every single time when Jesus raised someone from the dead, he spoke to the dead person and said, get up. He spoke to the dead person and said, get up. And that's exactly what Jesus did here. He says, young man, I'm telling you, get up, arise. And wow, the dead man sat up in the coffin, and he began to talk. He began speaking. And it's interesting, there's no other expression here about the story, at least explicitly what happened with him, because it says simply, Jesus gave the young man back to his mother. Gave him back to his mother. That's what the text says. That's the only expression we have. But the next thing it says is, the large crowd around, the crowd of people from Nain and probably those who were following Jesus, they were gripped with fear. Like, wow! And they began giving glory to God by saying, a great prophet has arisen among us. They're still not completely grasping exactly who Jesus was. A great prophet has arisen among us. And then some in the crowd said, and God has visited his people. And the next thing that the text says, it closes the story, it says, the news about Jesus continued to spread around, to be heard throughout Judea and all the surrounding region. The news about Jesus. People heard about this Jesus that's traveling, he's preaching, and he's healing. And the news spread. And that's what we find in the text. Now, what I want to do is I want to sort through and seek to draw out from Luke's argument, from what Luke is telling us, what is this trying to impress upon our lives? I believe this passage emphasizes for us the what of our faith, the why of our faith, and really the whole issue of what is true faith. What does it mean to truly believe? And as we look at that, let's just start off before I give the three ideas that I want to communicate here. We can all use a regular reality check. It's good to do a reality check every once in a while. Just where is my faith? How well am I doing? Is my focus where it should be? Do I have a sense of fitness that goes in my belief system? And how much fruit is being borne by my faith? Preventative maintenance for our relationship with the Lord. And let me just comment here. Some expressions as I look at this passage and try to draw things together. Faith in God Almighty. Faith in the Lord God Almighty, it's an assurance. It says in Hebrews 11, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for. It's an assurance. It's a belief. I believe. I trust. It's a confidence that we gain. And it's a dependence that we have that says God's plans, God's purposes, and God's power, they're all in control. And I say that because I think that is a foundational truth that we need to understand as we look at our culture today. We look at things that, things have changed. I grew up in a very utopian culture, especially in the community where I grew up, because almost everybody I knew attended our church and almost everybody I knew loved Jesus. The school district basically planned around the church for their activities. And it was kind of like, this is the way it is. The difficulty in that, or the struggle in that, was that we weren't stretched in our faith very often. When I went away to college, suddenly I saw the world in a different perspective. And then a couple weeks into college, I got my draft notice, and when I reported to the military, boy, did I see the world in a different perspective. But faith in God Almighty is an assurance, a belief, a confidence. Could say conviction there too if I wanted to use the C word. It's a dependence that God's plans, purposes, and power, they're all in control. That God has never lost control. And secondly, faith accepts God's authority. and it anticipates and asks for God's actions. Faith accepts God's authority and anticipates and asks for God's actions. Faith expects great things from a great God. Faith expects great things from a great God. And what I want to do now, I want to read through Romans 8, a section of Romans 8, beginning with verse 28, and I want us to think here, what is this saying about our faith? And let me just comment, when I talk about taking verses out of context, let me just say, every time you use a promise that was given to Israel, jump to the New Testament and look at Romans chapter 8 and see what it says for us, because there are promises that are explicitly written to you and to me. Not written to the Israelites in their situations, but rather written to you and to me. And what we find here in Romans 8, beginning with verse 28, and we know. And that word know there is we have that sense of conviction. We have that sense of assurance. We are certain that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to His purpose. What is faith? Faith is an assurance, a belief, a confidence, a dependence that God's plans, purposes, and powers are all in control. And we know that God causes all things to work together for good for those who love Him, who are called according to His purpose. Secondly, verses 31 and 32, and what shall we say to these things? What's our response? If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare His own Son, but delivered Him over for us all, how will He not also with Him freely give us all things? And finally, verses 37 through 39, that in all these things we overwhelmingly conquer through Him who loved us. For I am convinced, I am absolutely convinced that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor any other created thing will be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus. What does that say about our faith? What does that say about the importance of recognizing that my faith is the foundation of my relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ and with God Almighty? There it is. I have three things, three ideas that I want to communicate. And I think all of these things relate back to this passage. They relate back to what the concept is faith is the foundation. Faith is the victory. First off, if we're going to have this preventive maintenance, if we're going to prepare ourselves for life itself, we need to sharpen the focus of our faith. Or I need to sharpen the focus of my faith. The questions are, do I trust God? Do I really trust Him? Or am I relying on something else? A lot of people rely on what's in here, although there's not much in here. There are credit cards, I guess. The reality is, so often our faith in God gets lost in the shuffle because we find ourselves relying on something else. It was interesting. I went to see Bev Solito the other day, and I saw a poster on the wall where it was saying, you want to get rid of a bad habit? You know how you get rid of a bad habit? You replace it with another habit. Wait a minute now. I mean, logically that makes sense, but one addiction is replaced by another addiction. Nothing about God. And I need to trust God, and I need to step away from relying upon all those things in my life that become the crutches that interfere with my trust in God. So as we look at that, let's realize that nothing pleases God more than when someone has genuine faith in Him and in the fact that He has authority. Nothing pleases God more than for us to be able to say, hey, I'm trusting God. But understand, the world is going to look at you and say, you're crazy. But God should always be the object of our faith. And let's look at the Roman centurion for a moment. The Roman centurion, he heard the testimonies about Jesus. As I say, the text doesn't define whether he was known by or known that he knew Jesus in any personal way, but the strong implication, the strong suggestion is there was no relationship there between the two. He heard the testimonies about Jesus. He heard that Jesus was a teacher and a preacher. He heard that Jesus went around, He cast out demons. He healed people of their sicknesses. And what did He do? He recognized that this man, Jesus, had power and had authority. And therefore, he wholeheartedly believed that Jesus could speak the word and his servant would be healed. And the next thing that happened is Jesus commended his faith. Jesus says, I've not seen faith like that anywhere in the nation of Israel. And let's understand here that too often we lose the focus of our faith by, what do? We concentrate more on ourselves and on our situation than we do on God. And our circumstances begin to look bigger than God. We become overwhelmed by fear, overcome by doubt, overwhelmed by worry. I mentioned how people in my life have been a testimony to me. My dad. When I was a little boy, my dad went to church and that was about it. His faith was Sunday morning. And through the years, I watched as my dad began to change a little, but not. If you were to ask him explicitly, when did you become a Christian? He might have said, well, probably about the time that Greg graduated from high school, even though he'd been a deacon and an elder in our church. And why do I say that? Because right before I graduated from high school, he got transferred from the dairy where he worked in Kankakee, Illinois, to the dairy in Joliet, where he was a distributor. My dad was not an executive, he was a truck driver. And he drove a milk truck and delivered wholesale dairy products to restaurants, stores, and colleges. And they transferred him and said, hey, we're closing the dairy in Kankakee, and you're going to work out of Joliet now. So before my senior year of high school, the family starts looking for a house in Joliet, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, I don't want to go to a different school for my last year of high school. So we're talking through this all, and they're getting ready to move, and suddenly one of the bosses came to my dad and said, hey, I understand you're looking for a house. Don't. Why not, he said. Hey, well, we are going to give you a franchise in Kankakee where we'll give you the trucks, we'll give you the franchise, and it's your job to take care of all of it. It's your job to hire anybody that's going to do the distributing. So at that point in time, I got to say that my dad, he took it, but there was a sense of fear, a sense of worry. He hired one of my cousins that's a fair amount older than me to be his mechanic. And my cousin owned a service station and was the best mechanic in the area. And I'd say that not because he was my cousin, but because he was. And he's working on my dad's vehicles and trucks. And about 5 years later, my cousin says to me one day, you know what? He says, I sense your dad's making money. I said, well, why do you think that? He says, because now when he brings a truck in to be fixing it, he doesn't ask me in advance, what's it going to cost? He doesn't worry anymore about what it's going to cost. And I step back, and in fact, I said something to Dad, and Dad says, whoa. He says, I got to talk to Dwayne. Because you know what? He says, the Lord has taught me so much that through it all, I've got to trust Him. And my dad's faith grew to the point where by the time I graduated from college, my dad was a spiritual giant. He was my size, just a little bit bigger than me, but he was a spiritual giant. And for me to watch this man trust God under dire circumstances, under situations where, there were times when, his entire livelihood was up for grabs. But he says, we're going to trust God through this. And, it's interesting, he talked to my cousin. And about 5 years after that, my cousin's parents, my dad's older brother and sister-in-law, were having their 50th wedding anniversary. And for the wedding anniversary, my cousin, who didn't go to church, didn't want any part of it, he said to his mom, he says, Mom, what do you want for your 50th wedding anniversary? She says, I want you and the family to go to church with me on Sunday morning. So they went to church Sunday morning. God grabbed a hold of Dwayne's life that day, and Dwayne is now an elder at the Calvary Bible Church in Kankakee, which is an evangelical free church. Leads Bible studies. He's in his later 70s. And he now is a spiritual giant. But all of that because the testimony of faith, the testimony of we'll trust God through this situation. And this, as we look at this, how often do we lose our perspective? We lose the focus of our faith because the circumstances begin looking like, how am I going to do this? What's going to happen? And God is saying, hey, I'm right here. Trust me. I've got it worked out. My plans, my purposes, my power is sufficient. And you know what? One of the things that drives at me when I say that right here now, I realize that there are a lot of folks, and you're not going to admit it to me, but you're sitting back and saying, yeah, sure. Say something more profound than that, because that's not very profound to me. Reality is, I can't say anything more profound. I can't say anything more specific than the fact that we need to learn to trust in God through everything. And it scares me a little bit to say that because I wonder what's going to take me through to prove that. But we need to sharpen the focus of our faith and say, God, you're the object of my faith. And when the circumstances and situations begin to look bigger than you, I need to step back and get it back in my Bible and say, no, God, you're bigger than that. Secondly, I need to shape up the fitness of my faith. Shape up the fitness of my faith. And we ask the question, how strong is my faith? How strong is it? And how often does it become weak and worthless? How strong is my faith, and how often does it become weak and worthless? Here's the question. Am I a I'll believe it when I see it person? Am I a believe it when I see it? You know, this morning Dominic came up to me, bless his heart. He says, hey, Pastor Greg, the Bears are going to get killed today. And you know what I said to him? I'll believe it when I see it. But the fitness of our faith says, I'll believe it before I see it, and it has nothing to do with the Bears and the Packers. We need to learn to walk by faith instead of by sight. We need to recognize that God is in the middle of things even when the circumstances make it so that He's kind of hard to see. And we ask the question, how often do I nurture my faith? How often do I make my faith the object that says, okay, I need to build my trust. I need to increase my trust. What am I doing to develop an intimacy with the Lord to know Him better? Let me just say, we are all very, very hectically busy in this world. And I admit to you that it's easy for me to stand up here and say these things this morning because my job allows me to focus in on getting to know God better. I do it day in and day out. That's a blessing. And I understand that everybody else here in this room probably has many other things, many other distractions that take them away from it because it's not part of your regular daily responsibilities. But we need to develop an intimacy with the Lord that says, hey, I want to know you better. The more intimately I know God and recognize His greatness and His grace, the more my faith should grow and mature, especially when I exercise my faith. When I exercise my faith, and the question is, do we exercise it? Donna and I moved to Dallas, Texas back in 1977. We were flat broke. We borrowed enough money to rent the U-Haul trailer. We couldn't get a truck because we couldn't afford the gas or the rental of the truck, so we got a U-Haul trailer. We got rid of everything else we had. We took everything that we could in the largest U-Haul trailer you could rent, and we drove to Dallas, Texas. We got there. We were there 2 weeks. Donna found a job at a school. And I wasn't working yet, but it was her birthday. And we're figuring, okay, we got this money to pay the rent. We got this, can we do something special for your birthday? So we're thinking maybe we can. And we go out to the car, and our hood was up on our car, and our battery had been stolen overnight. You know where the money that we were going to use to go out and get something to eat for Donna's birthday went? It went to buy a battery. And I got to tell you, through the 4 years at DTS, God stretched our faith, forced us to exercise our faith, forced us to realize that, hey, I'm your source, I'm your resource, I'm what you have, trust me. And we were going into our last semester, and we counted up our dollars. We didn't want to have any debts. We didn't want to have any loans. And we were $500 short. No, we were $520 short of being able to pay our last bill for tuition. She went to a Bible study one night, or an actually exercise group and Bible study at church. She came home with an envelope from some friends of ours there, and they said to her, open it when you get home with Greg. You open up an envelope, and as soon as we open the envelope and take the card out, $300 bills fall out. And then we open up a little bit more, and then $450s fell out. Add it up, that's $500. First thing I said was, okay, God, you provided the $500, we'll find the $20. But we got out of seminary debt-free. And it was all because God taught us. Are we super spiritual? Are we super Christian? No, we're not. You've seen enough of me in these last 2.5 years say, no, that guy's not super. But we realize that we exercise faith and God rewards it. Jesus heard this about the centurion, and he was amazed at him, and he turned to the crowd following him and said, I tell you, I have not found so great a faith even in Israel. I've not found it. And in fact, I read something in one of the books I was looking at, and it said something about, look at the idea that Jesus had not found faith. And I went back to my Greek text, and I looked at it, and that jumps out on the page explicitly saying that Jesus was looking for faith. It strongly suggests that God is constantly looking for faith among His people. He's looking for you to trust Him. He's watching and saying, trust me, trust me, trust me. And our last idea is here. I should size up the fruitfulness of my faith. What are the results of my faith? What impact and influence does my faith have on those around me? Going on a little bit farther here. The healing of the servant emphasizes the value and the vision that we can have of faith. This man trusted God and God came through. But the miracle of bringing the young man to life, back to life, exposes what? The compassion, the almighty authority of God. It points to a God that is trustworthy. It points to a God that meets needs. And as we size up the fruitfulness of our faith, where are the results of my faith directed? Where are they directed? What do I anticipate? Is it something I want for me? Or am I like the centurion? Is it something I want for somebody else? How much do I expect and anticipate God to do? Finally, it appears that frequently we ask and expect from God frequently what we ask and expect from God include things that are humanly possible. Our faith sometimes is on a lower degree than what I think God wants it to be. Faith in an all-powerful God should lead us to requests and expectations that are extraordinary and supernatural. Extraordinary and supernatural. And in view of that, 3 questions and we'll close. Is my faith selfish and self-centered? If that's the case, it's possible that's why your faith doesn't amount to much. Is my faith contagious? Does my trust in the Lord encourage those around me? Just some simple thoughts here as we close. The unselfish nature of the centurion's faith was special and unique. He trusted God and asked the Lord Jesus to heal his servant. He didn't ask for personal gain. As we look at faith as our culture defines it, we find the name it and claim it people. They always tend to dwell on the selfish aspects of faith. Have faith and God will do something special for you. Have faith and God will make you rich and famous. Have faith and God will bless you. But the faith of the centurion was above and beyond that. It was directed toward an almighty God, and the results were for the benefit of others. May our faith be something that brings great honor and glory to God, and that desires to reach out toward others. Faith is so closely related to grace, for by grace you're saved through faith. Faith is a gift, and it shouldn't be used in a self-centered manner. But it should make a difference both in our individual lives as well as in the lives of others. Faith. Let's pray. Father God, I thank you for the truth of your word today. Help us to expect not what's humanly possible by our trust in you, but help us to expect that which is extraordinary and supernatural. Help us to see you at work. We've seen you at work in various ways, and we know that you're here, Father. Increase our faith. Not by challenges. Well, if that's your way, I have to accept it. But Father, increase our faith because we know you, and we know how great you are. And I pray this in Jesus' name.